Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the ancient, paper-crinkling, pebble-clinking world of Byzantine bureaucracy, where taxes weren't typed or even written at first. They were filed with a handful of colored stones and a sincere sense of confusion. Imagine a tax system so complex it needs its own scribe just to explain why your goat owes half a cucumber. You step into a softly echoing chamber tucked away in Constantinople, somewhere near the scent of olive oil and the occasional disgruntled civil servant. The light is low, filtered through slitted windows, and the air smells faintly of ink, old parchment, and something suspiciously cabbage-like. A man in layered robes, each more frayed than the last, squints at a series of bowls laid out on a wooden slab. He's counting pebbles. Yes, pebbles. Welcome to the Byzantine Fiscal Office, one of the empire's proudest and pettiest inventions. Each colored stone represents something taxable: blue for wheat, red for land rent, green for livestock, and a slippery gray that no one ever remembers but always ends up costing extra. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you all are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward in soft sandals. The stone floor clicks underfoot. The tax clerk doesn't look up. He's too busy dropping pebbles into tiny labeled wooden compartments and muttering something about barley quotas. There's a parchment scroll to his right, barely touched, and a ceramic cup to his left that you suspect contains a third refill of watered wine. You sit, or rather, you perch on the edge of a creaky stool clearly not designed for comfort or long-term spinal health. He finally acknowledges your presence with a grunt and hands you a palm-sized velvet pouch. It's heavier than you expect. Inside, 7 small pebbles, each carefully dyed a different color. Your payment kit. Here's the trick. You're not here to pay in coin. That's for people with imperial salaries or black market olives. You're here to record how much you owe in code. Those colored stones are dropped into bowls, noted in ledgers, or not, and carted off to a bigger office 2 districts over. Eventually, someone will add up what you owe, send a donkey with a note to your landlord, and possibly triple the amount for administrative reasons no one quite understands. It's not fast, it's not intuitive, but it is Byzantine. Historians still argue whether this color-coded system was truly standardized or just an elaborate excuse to confuse taxpayers into polite compliance. There's some evidence that in outlying provinces, different shades of the same color meant different things entirely, like pale red for wine tax, crimson for military fees, and dusty pink for someone forgot to finish this form. The system's strength lay in its physicality. Stones couldn't be altered as easily as ink, and peasants were far more likely to remember their debt if it jingled slightly in their pocket. Of course, this also meant a whole shadow economy of pebble swapping emerged. Some entrepreneurial souls even carving fake stones out of soapstone or hardened bread. You peek over the scribe's shoulder. He's adding a thin charcoal mark beside a list of names. Each one corresponds to a property, a yield, or a person responsible for sheep that keep escaping the census. He sighs. You've underpaid your fig tax again. You hadn't even realized. Figs were taxable, but apparently so is their scent if the wind's right. He slides the velvet pouch back toward you and gestures at the bowls. Time to add 2 more greens and a sorrowful yellow. There's something oddly soothing about the process. The soft tap of stone on wood, the scratching of quill on parchment, the distant sound of donkeys braying at a wagon stuck in a cabbage cart. And then there's the man at the next table over, clearly new to this. He's trying to use marbles instead of pebbles, and they keep rolling off the table into unfortunate directions. One bounces into a brazier and is never seen again. The clerk sighs the sigh of someone who's seen far worse, possibly involving ducks. In the corner sits an older official, his beard braided in quiet rebellion against the empire's ever-shifting grooming policies. He's tasked with sealing the tax pouches before they're sent to the main treasury. You watch him wrap twine carefully around the pebble-filled sacks, then mark them with a wax stamp so elaborate it probably took 3 committees to approve. He glances up. "Don't eat the pebbles," he says dryly. Someone always does. As you wait for your ledger to be tallied, you begin to appreciate the strange ritual of it all. It's not just about taxes, it's a whole choreography. The order of stones, the weight of pouches, the subtle click of a seal. It's a ballet made of bureaucracy. And in this sleepy little room, where time stretches long and parchment curls at the corners from humidity and heat, you start to feel your eyelids droop. The walls are thick. The air barely stirs. Everything smells like old ink and dried figs. And still, the pebbles drop, one by one. You lean back ever so slightly on your undersized stool, feeling the gentle ache of a day spent avoiding labor, only to be ambushed by tax time. Across from you, the clerk has moved on to calculating something deeply unsettling called the ericon, a civic maintenance tax that may or may not involve paying for a neighbor's broken aqueduct, regardless of your aqueduct usage. He pulls out a small cloth map of your district. It's stitched rather than inked, with tiny embroidered circles indicating tax zones. He prods at it with a stylus and mutters, You're on the edge of both the olive press and the bakery. That's a dual zone overlap fee. You open, your mouth to object, but quickly realize this will only delay things. Besides, the alternative is a clarifying visit from a junior tax enforcer who travels with a very loud goose. You pay 2 grey pebbles, 1 reluctantly. As he records your payment, you begin to notice how the office is organized. Not alphabetically, not by district, but by type of confusion. One desk handles crop yields from land no one can find on a map anymore. Another manages taxes on fish caught from rivers that dried up 30 years ago. There's even a dead but still taxable drawer, which you're not going to ask about. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine tax system was meant to function or merely to dissuade revolt through exhaustion. The empire was vast, culturally diverse, and often broke. A tax system based on obscurity, oral tradition, and pebble hierarchy kept everyone busy and bewildered enough not to organize a rebellion. You shift on your stool again. A scribe nearby is humming a folk tune that's oddly catchy, something about paying tithes in turnips. His fingers, ink-stained and careful, sort pebbles by shade under an oil lamp that flickers with each exhale. In front of him, a customer with a small wooden box labeled chicken-related incidents. Curious, you lean in. The man, a tired-looking goat farmer, insists he's been wrongly taxed for fowl damages. It was 1 rooster, and it tripped 1 noblewoman, he says. The scribe, not looking up, replies, You still owe the poultry disturbance levy. A blue and yellow stone are exchanged. No further discussion. And here's the charm of it all. This is not a punitive office. It's not angry. It's just chronically overwhelmed. The entire bureaucracy functions on the principle that no one understands everything, and that's precisely why it works. Mistakes are inevitable, but rarely punished. Instead, they're archived, carefully. You notice now the shelves lining the far wall, dozens of clay jars, each filled with surplus pebbles. Their labels are faded but readable. Misc, wheat errors, cancelled goat debts, reassigned military levies, unclear why. A particularly large jar, sealed with red wax, is ominously marked, taxes owed by a cat. A young assistant comes by to collect your finalized tally. He's probably 13, eyes wide, sandals flapping softly as he moves. He grabs your sealed pouch, tucks it into a larger satchel filled with other colourful clinks, and disappears into the back. There's an odd satisfaction in hearing the muffled pebbles settle together. You've participated. You've contributed. You've absolutely overpaid for municipal grain storage that no longer exists. But still, there's a comfort in being counted, even if inaccurately. Then there's a lull. The scribes pause to stretch. Someone pours weak wine. One older man attempts to roast a fig over the brazier, fails and eats it anyway. The building hums with quiet purpose, never quite still, never quite hurried. You glance around and notice a faded tapestry above the main desk. It depicts an allegory, the great ledger of heaven, where every soul's virtues and debts are balanced on golden scales. Below it, a far more practical sign reads, "Please do not eat the tax stones. It's here, during this rare moment of calm, that your eyes wander to a cracked leather ledger labeled Imperial Tax Experiments, Trial A. You can't help yourself. You open it. Inside are scribbled notes from a long-defunct attempt to switch to feather tokens. Apparently, someone in the Imperial Court decided that goose feathers, dyed in 16 shades, could replace stones. They were lighter, cheaper, and felt friendlier. Unfortunately, they also blew away easily, clogged rain gutters, and confused actual geese, leading to multiple avian uprisings in Thrace. You close the book. You have learned enough. At the far end of the office, a curtain flutters. Through it steps a high-ranking official in layered robes of imperial purple, trimmed with rust-coloured fur. This is the Logothetes Tugenico, the Grand Overseer of General Taxation. He surveys the room like a parent inspecting children's finger paintings, vaguely proud, slightly horrified. He spots you, nods once, then proceeds to the corner desk, and promptly falls asleep with a scroll over his face. That, in itself, is an audit tactic. You rise, quietly. Your session is over. Your pouch has been submitted, your obligation vaguely recorded, and your feet slightly numb. But you did it. You've engaged with one of the most intricate bureaucracies in human history, and escaped without being fined for excessive asking of questions, a real rule someone definitely made up. As you exit, the door creaks just slightly. The sun has shifted, casting warm beams through the corridor. A donkey tied outside blinks at you with the slow wisdom of an unpaid intern. You feel oddly proud. Today, you were part of something grand, ridiculous, and deeply human. A system built not just on control, but on ritual, patience, and the unshakable belief that someone, somewhere, understands the pebble chart. And as your feet crunch softly on the cobblestones outside, you hear the faint clatter of a fresh batch of taxes being filed behind you. You stretch your arms overhead, breathing in the warm, bread-scented air that always seems to hang in the lower districts of Constantinople. The tax office is behind you, but the bureaucracy isn't done with you yet, because now it's time for the receipts. See, in the Byzantine world, nothing truly happened unless it was written down 3 times. Once by the clerk, once by the overseer, and once by someone's uncle who could sort of write, but was mostly there for the wine. And you need to collect your proof of payment. Otherwise, come spring, someone might accuse you of tax evasion, and you'll have to re-explain the poultry incident all over again. You follow a narrow alleyway to the receipt annex, a lower ceilinged building with faded frescoes of smiling men holding scrolls, which is wildly optimistic. Inside, the air is thick with dust, beeswax, and the smell of overused parchment. Several copyists sit at desks, dipping reed pens into ink with the same solemnity a priest uses to anoint a baby. Your name is called by a man whose voice cracks like a tired thunderclap. You're the one with the amphora tax and the goat dispute. You nod. Take a seat. This might take a while. He begins reciting the details of your payment aloud to a younger scribe, who transcribes each syllable with exaggerated precision. 2 grey pebbles for public grain drying, 1 amber for fishery nonsense, half a blue for aqueduct proximity. You get the impression he's making at least some of this up, and now comes the ritual of sealing. Wax is dripped onto the scroll and a metal stamp, decorated with a stylized eagle and something that might be a poorly drawn duck, is pressed into the wax. The official then blows gently on it, as if cooling soup, before sliding the receipt across the table like a blackjack dealer on Ambien. Historians still argue whether this practice of elaborate sealing was a security measure, or simply a way to keep underemployed nobles busy. Either way, the Byzantine seal game was no joke. Some receipts were sealed not once, but 3 times. Once by the tax clerk, again by a regional overseer, and finally by the imperial censor, whose entire job was to decide whether someone's goat-related expense was in the spirit of the law. Your scroll is handed to you with a reverence normally reserved for newborns or pies. You try to smile appreciatively, though you're not entirely sure which tax this scroll confirms. Still, you roll it up gently and tuck it under your arm, feeling faintly accomplished. In the corner, a woman argues with a clerk about whether her husband paid the property tax before he was struck by a falling fig crate. The clerk, without missing a beat, replies, "Was he under the crate on purpose? That affects liability." You pretend not to listen, and now you notice the shelf. Every receipt, once written, was eventually copied again and stored in the Anagraphion, the registry archive. It's a stone building up the hill with iron doors, no windows, and at least 2 suspiciously muscular cats. Inside, clerks spend their entire lives recopying the same scrolls, just in case a fire, flood, or particularly enthusiastic tax reform should strike. Byzantines took records seriously. They believed that writing could preserve order in a world full of chaos, invasions and surprise bread levies. Some records in the Anagraphion date back 200 years, though many are just notes that read, "Could not find pig, tax deferred." As you exit the annex, your receipt safely secured, a young courier brushes past you carrying a satchel full of pebbles. He's off to the coastal districts, where the fishermen pay taxes in something called eel tallies, which you pray never applies to you. The courier winks. His sandals are mismatched. Somehow, that makes perfect sense. Outside, the wind picks up. You wrap your cloak tighter around you. A neighbor shuffles by holding 3 sacks of barley and mumbling about non-standard levy weights. He's heading to the market court, where disputes about taxes paid in flour are settled via a system that involves smelling the flour and guessing the month it was milled. You pause to watch a tiny procession moving toward the palace gate. At the front, a pair of tax envoys from Cappadocia, dragging a cart filled with painted stones, goatskin ledgers, and a disassembled bronze scale. Behind them, a boy holds a sign that reads, "Imperial Audit, do not interrupt." You instinctively lower your gaze. No one interrupts the audit parade. That's the thing about the Byzantine system. It's messy, yes, and occasionally absurd, but it's also strangely beautiful. Because beneath the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the overly enthusiastic wax ceiling, there's a belief in continuity. That if you write it down enough times, keep enough records, and stamp enough documents, maybe, just maybe, the empire won't fall. Of course, the empire will fall, eventually, but not today. Today, they are still writing things down. A few steps later, you reach a neighborhood bakery where a tax notice is posted on the door. Due to ongoing tax recalculations, bread will be sold at weight plus Pebbles surcharge. You sigh and fork over an extra token. The baker hands you a warm loaf and a receipt that reads, "One loaf, one small sigh, one smooth stone." You add it to your growing scroll collection. As you wander back through the city, you pass a school where children are being taught how to count using replica tax stones. One girl raises her hand and asks, "What if I pay in shells instead?" The teacher nods sagely and replies, "That's a different empire, my dear." And so the system continues, not because it's perfect, but because it's persistent. The sun is lazily drifting across the hazy midday sky now, filtering golden light through the finely carved stone archways of the lower administrative quarter. Your receipt, curling ever so slightly at the corners, is tucked beneath your arm, like a treasured bedtime scroll, warm from your side. But you're not done yet. The Byzantine tax system, after all, was not built for speed. It was built for thoroughness, and maybe a little bit of petty revenge. Your next stop is the Office of Assessment Reconciliation, an utterly unassuming name for what is essentially the empire's official complaints department. If you think a clerk miscounted your goats, or your pebble colors were misrecorded, was that red or maroon? This is where you come, and you have questions. Because you've noticed something odd. Your neighbor, old Theodosios, paid 2 pebbles fewer than you, and you're fairly sure you both own the same number of suspiciously underweight chickens. The discrepancy, while minor, gnaws at you like a bureaucratic termite. So here you are. The office is staffed by a trio of elderly men who look like they've been sitting at those desks since the reign of Justinian. One of them gestures you over with a quill the length of a sword. He peers at you over his spectacles and asks, "Are you here about the disputed melon crate deduction?" You shake your head. "No, poultry discrepancy." He sighs with something bordering on theatrical disappointment and begins rifling through a stack of wax tablets. Now, here's where it gets fun. The Byzantines had a reconciliation ritual so complex, it would make modern accountants weep tears of admiration. First, a counter-pebble session is initiated. This involves placing pebbles, yes, the same ones used for payment, into various bowls based on category: livestock, property, fish-related concerns, and miscellaneous, which was a suspiciously popular bin. You're invited to sit while your poultry category is audited. The room smells like sandalwood and vinegar ink. The clerk begins muttering to himself. 2 chickens registered, 3 pebbles collected. Could be a redundancy. He turns to you and asks, "Did any of your chickens look particularly expensive?" You pause. Define expensive. He doesn't. Instead, he pulls out a small reference scroll titled Comparative Poultry Values. In Bithynia and beyond, you're not sure what's more alarming, that this scroll exists or that it's well thumbed. According to it, there was a brief spike in chicken valuation after a popular saint was allegedly resurrected by a rooster. The clerk makes a note of this, muttering, "A miracle surcharge could apply retroactively, depending on feather hue." Historians still argue whether this category of tax, known as the spiritual inflation clause, was ever seriously enforced, or merely one of those satirical entries inserted by bored scribes during particularly long winters. But the joke's on them, because these clauses were sometimes enforced. There's record of a man fined triple for his sheep after it appeared in a dream to a minor noblewoman. That sheep, incidentally, also had a name, Euphemios, which in sheep terms means bringer of tax chaos. Back in your reality, the clerk determines that your chickens are standard market hens and adjusts your pebble count accordingly. He scribbles a correction on a piece of rough parchment, stamps it, folds it, stamps it again, and finally hands it over with a tired smile. Take this to the confirmations office. If they don't throw it back at you, you're probably fine. As you leave, another clerk enters with a satchel full of new poultry definitions, which appear to be loosely based on the angle of a chicken's strut. You don't even ask. You head east, through the colonnade, past a small shaded fountain, where pigeons conduct their own tax-free meetings. One of them stares at you with judgmental eyes. You've paid more in foul levies than it will earn in a lifetime. Your destination is a small, round building with faded mosaic tiles depicting harvest scenes and smug-looking bureaucrats holding what looks suspiciously like calculators. No, abacuses. Possibly symbolic, probably aspirational. The confirmations office is the empire's final word on disputes. Whatever they stamp here holds. It's manned by 3 nuns, which might seem surprising until you realize nuns were often the best administrators in town. They're sharp, no nonsense, and operate with a speed that makes most scribes look like daydreaming turtles. You hand over your correction slip. The eldest nun glances at it, raises an eyebrow, and says, "Chickens again. Byzantium will fall to poultry madness, mark my words." She doesn't even smile. She just stamps it. Twice. With force. You're officially reconciled. As you exit, a young boy outside is selling approved pebble replicas made of sugar. "Lickable taxes," he cries. You buy one. It's grape-flavored and melts faster than public trust in a tax reassessment. You take the long route home through the Olive District, where tax collectors are currently assessing whether tapenade counts as a luxury item or an olive byproduct. A heated debate is taking place beside an amphora stand. Someone gestures wildly with a ladle. You wisely keep walking. You pass a woman chalking out math on her doorstep, counting the number of olive pits per jar, perhaps. A sign above her reads, "Taxed by the pint, pit quantity irrelevant." Fair enough. And then, a surprise. A band of young scholars performing a tax-themed play in the square. It's called the Pebble of Justice, and it features a villainous moneylender, a heroic scroll keeper, and a climactic monologue about proportional taxation. You stay for the monologue. It's oddly moving. As the curtain, tapestry falls, you feel something like peace. You've played the Pebble game, haggled over hens, and made it through the maze of parchment and politics. You're not richer, you're not wiser, but you are officially tax reconciled. And that, in Byzantium, is about as close as anyone gets to bliss. The sun is beginning to mellow into late afternoon warmth now, casting long shadows across the mosaic streets. The sea breeze stirs your tunic and makes the corners of old scrolls flutter on market stalls, like gossip ready to escape. But you, seasoned taxpayer that you now are no longer just a participant in the Byzantine fiscal labyrinth. You are an initiate, and as initiates do, you seek further mysteries. So you turn your steps toward the Pebble Chambers, an odd term, for what is essentially the central sorting and storage facility for tax pebbles. You've heard rumors about this place. Whispers of its silent, cavernous halls, of guards who count more than they speak, and of scribes whose hands twitch in their sleep, still sketching columnar ledgers on the air. The building itself is built, like a temple, ornate, imposing, a little too proud for something that houses rocks. The front lintel bears an inscription in ancient Greek, order from dust, truth from stone. It would be more inspiring if you hadn't just spent an entire morning arguing about chickens. You're waved in by a sleepy guard who doesn't even ask for identification. He just looks you over, shrugs and says, "Don't lick the pebbles." You weren't planning on it, but the warning leaves you vaguely curious. Inside, it's dim and cool, with tall marble columns lining either side of the main hall. The air smells faintly of old oil lamps and chalk. Lining the walls are shelves stacked with sealed amphorae, each labelled with curling wax tags. Cattle, Nicaea, Spring 908. Fish tariffs, Pontus region. Monastic exemptions, tentative. Some jars have red wax, others black, and one entire section has tags that simply read MISC, with the sort of ambiguity that accountants fear. A clerk greets you with a tilt of the head and a look that says, "Explain yourself," in 10 words or fewer. You give him your confirmation stamp. He nods solemnly and beckons for you to follow. What follows is one of the oddest experiences of your life. You're led into a sorting chamber where a dozen scribes, young, old, and in between, are hunched over stone counters, scooping coloured pebbles into vast grids carved into the tables. Every 10 pebbles, a small bronze bell is rung. You're not sure why. No one explains. It turns out this is part of the reconciliation audit. Even after a tax has been paid, the pebbles are verified, counted again, compared with register records, and occasionally licked. You finally ask about the licking. The clerk explains that counterfeit pebbles, yes, this is real, were sometimes made from dyed wax or hardened cheese. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread problem or just one poorly documented scandal in a fish-heavy district during a dairy surplus. Nevertheless, the tradition of pebble tasting persisted well into the 10th century, and at least one noble family was disgraced over what became known as the curdled tax. The clerk pauses beside a marble pedestal topped with a sealed amphora. "This," he says, "is the reserve jar." It holds exactly 300 multicolored pebbles, one for each official tax category recognized by the empire. From pig hoof tithes to window placement levies, every potential revenue stream is represented. You raise an eyebrow. Window placement? He nods. Light was taxed. Too many windows meant prosperity. Prosperity meant dues. You try to imagine someone counting your shutters and frowning thoughtfully before demanding a payment in green pebbles. Byzantium really did have a tax for everything. Further into the chamber, you pass the pebble ledger wall, a 20-foot-long fresco of painted squares and squiggles that serve as a visual record of annual collection. It's oddly beautiful, geometric, earthy, almost meditative. As you gaze at it, a sudden appreciation flickers within you. This empire, however maddening its systems may be, cared. It obsessed. It archived every last turnip tithe and duck-related fine. You're shown the logbook where your recent transaction has been recorded. Your name, misspelled but close enough, is scribbled beside the date, a short note on your poultry dispute, and a symbol resembling a plucked feather. Apparently, that's the clerk's shorthand for chicken-related matters. You've made history. You're offered a moment to rest in the reflective alcove, a small niche filled with cushions, mint tea, and a single potted fig tree. This, you're told, is where taxpayers could sit and process the fairness of their financial journey. You doubt anyone found true clarity in those cushions, but the tea's quite nice. As you sip, you overhear a nearby conversation between two junior scribes arguing over the proper color coding for ferret taxes. One insists it should be taupe, the other a firm believer in saffron. They're both wrong. Ferrets fall under the weasel adjacency clause, which requires alternating colors. You decide not to interrupt. Let them learn the hard way. You rise, refreshed. Your teacup is gently collected by a servant with a pebble-shaped brooch. Everything here is on brand. You thank the clerk, who responds only with a courteous nod and a murmured, "Peace be upon your ledgers." Outside, the sun has dipped low, casting amber light across the rooftops. The city seems slower now, more thoughtful, as if it too is reviewing the day's transactions. You pass a small shrine where a merchant is lighting incense to Saint Menas, patron of honest trade. He glances at your wax-stamped slip and nods approvingly. "Pebble work?" he asks. You nod. "Poultry dispute," he winces. "Tough category." You agree, and then you're walking again, feeling the day's weight begin to shift from your shoulders. You've done it. Navigated the Byzantine Pebble bureaucracy, witnessed the sacred reserve jar, drank the mint tea of reconciliation. There's more to this story, of course. More strange taxes, more ink-stained ledgers, more eccentric clauses tucked between scrolls. But for now, you carry your stamped parchment like a badge of survival. Let others scoff at coloured pebbles. You know better. You know they hold the weight of an empire. You sleep surprisingly well after your day at the Pebble Chambers. Better than you thought someone who argued about poultry taxes for 6 hours could. When the next morning arrives with that gentle orange haze creeping through the curtains, you stretch, scratch your head, and think, maybe I'll go check out how the empire trains those clerks. Because somewhere between sipping mint tea beside a potted fig tree and overhearing a debate on ferret tax color codes, a question has rooted itself in your brain. How do people actually become Byzantine bureaucrats? You step into the street, still chewing on a crust of barley bread, and make your way toward the School of Fiscal Doctrine, a state-run academy that trains the empire's future scribes, ledgersmiths, and pebble sorters. It's located near the Forum of Constantine, nestled behind a bakery that always smells distractingly of sesame rings and honey. The building itself is a quiet stone structure that tries not to look important. which is precisely how Byzantine administrators liked it. Humility was good optics, especially when your daily work involved telling widows their vinegar rations were taxable if kept in clay jars instead of copper ones. A gatekeeper greets you with a squint, a nod, and a broom. He's sweeping dust into neat piles as though disciplining it. "Student or curious taxpayer?" he asks without looking up. You answer honestly. He shrugs. Enter with humility. Exit with a migraine. Inside, the school resembles a hybrid between a monastery and an archive. It's hushed, perfumed with beeswax and ink. A hallway leads past several small classrooms, where the lessons in progress read like the world's most boring, but oddly specific, syllabus. Tariff coding for Aegean maritime routes. Goat-based. Penalties and their exceptions. Advanced pebble color theory. The headmaster, a wiry old man with a voice like dry papyrus, takes you on a short tour. "We start with math," he explains. "Not elegant math, not poetic math, just counting things." He waves at a group of students murmuring as they shift beans between two bowls. Beans for beginners, pebbles come later. You pause beside a fresco depicting Hermes, not as a fleet-footed messenger, but as an ancient auditor, weighing scrolls in one hand and pebbles in the other. It's charming, in a way that only bureaucrats could find deeply meaningful. Curriculum here is rigorous. Students spend 3 years learning Byzantine numerals, 2 more deciphering fiscal Latin, and another year mastering the notoriously complex system of imperial seals, each stamped on tax documents to prove authenticity. Some seals are so detailed they're referred to as miniature soap operas in wax. One famously depicts a scene of a goat fleeing a tax collector, only to be chased by a secondary character, presumably a registrar. You observe a class reciting the imperial tax oath, a solemn chant that pledges, among other things, to never round decimals for convenience and to always verify amphora contents in duplicate. Historians still argue whether this oath was universally enforced or merely a decorative tradition, like singing the empire's anthem before filing fish import receipts. But students here take it seriously. One girl recites it so fervently she accidentally flings her inkpot into the air. No one blinks. At the end of their studies, students face the trials of bureaucracy. A 3-part exam involving a simulated tax dispute, a pebble audit, and, most difficult of all, a scroll copying challenge where they must rewrite an entire fiscal report without smudging, abbreviating, or falling asleep. Only 1 in 4 passes. The others must repeat the final year or, if truly hopeless, are reassigned to the less glamorous division of municipal sand regulation. The school also houses a small library dedicated to unusual tax rulings from across the empire. One scroll, preserved under glass, describes a legal argument about whether clouds passing through private skylights should be taxed as ambient enrichment. Another details a region that taxed wind direction changes, presumably to balance meteorological luck. And yet, amid the absurdity, there's a sense of pride here, an understanding that while their work may never be poetic, it keeps the empire from sliding into chaos. These are the people who ensure grain moves, soldiers are paid, and temples stay open. In their own way, they are the backbone of Byzantium. One student approaches you timidly. He's young, freckled, ink-stained to the elbows. "Did you really go to the Pebble chambers?" he whispers. You nod. He looks awestruck. Did they let you see the reserve jar? They did, he gasps. Did you see the taupe pebble for ferret adjacency? I did. He clutches his chest like you've spoken the name of a sacred relic. Then he scurries off to tell his classmates. You feel oddly important. Outside, the sesame-scented wind tickles your face. You glance back at the School of Fiscal Doctrine, its squat walls, its serious windows, its tiny garden of herbs for ink-making. It may not rival the great academies of rhetoric or philosophy, but its graduates keep the empire humming. And as you walk away, you can't help but smile. Not everyone in history got trained to sort coloured rocks with this much flair. You decide it's time to explore the next layer of this empire's delightfully tedious machinery, the tax collectors themselves. After all, what's the use of training all these bureaucrats if no one's brave or bored enough to carry their pebbled will out into the real world? So, you follow the whispers down the winding alleyways to the Office of Provincial Levy Coordination, a title that feels like a tongue twister devised by someone who hated joy. This is where field collectors, known as the episcopoi, receive their assignments. They're the feet on the ground, trudging through vineyards and sheep pens, scrolls flapping, pebble purses jangling. The building is modest, tucked between a fishmonger and a shrine to Saint Theophanes, the accountant. Inside, it smells of dried figs, oil lamps, and the constant anxiety of quotas. A clerk at the front desk glances up and immediately says, "Wrong office if you're here to complain. About goose overvaluation, that's 3 doors down." You assure him you're just visiting. He shrugs and mutters, "Lucky you." A door swings open, and a pair of collectors shuffle in, boots dusty, robes slightly tattered, carrying scroll tubes strapped like quivers on their backs. One drops a heavy pouch on the counter. Pebbles spill out in every imaginable shade: olive green for fishing licenses, beige for barley surcharges, a reddish pink for possibly scented wax imports. "Long trip?" asks the clerk. "5 days, groans the older of the two, pulling a burr from his tunic. "Got chased by a goat. Again." It turns out tax collection in the provinces is not the dignified operation you might expect. You're invited to shadow one team heading out that very afternoon. You hesitate briefly, thinking of your comfortable bed and the mint tea waiting back in the city. But curiosity wins. The collector you're paired with is named Alexios. He's grizzled, sarcastic, and has a tattoo on his wrist that reads "Scribere est regnare." To write is to rule. He insists it's a joke. "Except when it's not," he adds, winking. You hop onto a mule because carts are too fancy and walking is too slow, and begin the bumpy journey to a farming village that apparently hasn't paid its vinegar basin dues in 3 seasons. Along the way, Alexios teaches you the unofficial rules of field tax work. Always carry extra pebbles. Never insult a farmer's pig, no matter how smug it looks. If someone offers you pomegranate wine as a gift, drink it, but don't trust their crop report. Hiwe shows you his pebble pouch. It's more worn than the ones in the pebble chambers, and the pebbles have names scratched on the back in tiny letters. Keeps it personal, he says. This one's for goat lending permits. Name's Parthenia. This one's fig tree exemption. She's Thalia. Helps me remember I'm not just ruining someone's week. I'm maintaining civilization. It's hard not to admire the man's commitment. You arrive in the village by dusk. It's quiet, the sort of quiet that always means everyone's watching from behind shutters. Alexios knocks on the magistrate's door and recites the opening lines of the standard levy announcement. It's a polite formula, essentially. "Hi, I'm here to turn your economy upside down." The magistrate, a man shaped like a weathered turnip, produces the village's ledger. It's not so much a book as a very tired scroll held together by hope and paste. As Alexios reviews it, a child runs by giggling, covered in what you're pretty sure is goat butter. Eventually, the negotiations begin. The village claims it had a bad year. Too much sun, not enough frogs. Yes, frogs. Something about their absence disrupting the barley fermentation cycle. Alexios listens, nods, scratches notes with a stylus that has seen better centuries, and occasionally reaches into his pouch for the relevant pebbles. There's some haggling, an emotional testimonial about a sacred fig tree, and a long moment where a chicken is placed solemnly between the two parties as collateral. You don't ask why. Historians still argue whether tax collectors were strictly enforcers or also part-time mediators. From what you're seeing, Alexios is equal parts auditor, therapist, and travelling judge of poultry-based barter deals. When all's settled, he gently shakes 2 pebbles into the village's own fiscal jar. One is ochre, the other speckled. "Deferred payment," he explains. "They've got until the next full moon to produce the vinegar. If not, I come back with a bigger jar. You're given a bed of hay for the night, which is surprisingly cozy once you stop sneezing. The stars above blink like imperial seals, each one probably representing a different regional surtax. In the morning, Alexios offers you a stale honey, biscuit, and a piece of advice. Anyone can write a tax law. Few can enforce it without getting stabbed with a ladle. You return to the city with a new respect for the dusty, sunburned, mildly eccentric army of collectors who keep Byzantium's economy crawling forward. 1 pebble, 1 chicken, 1 passive-aggressive village elder at a time. And as the gates of the capital come into view, you realize something unexpected. The system works not because it's elegant, but because everyone inside it knows it's ridiculous and still chooses to participate. Back in Constantinople, with the sounds of clinking pebble jars still echoing in your ears and the faint scent of rural goat clinging to your cloak, you're led into the more arcane corners of the bureaucracy, the realm of audits and appeals. Here's where the true alchemy happens, not turning lead into gold, but turning mild tax evasion into year-long legal marathons, often decided by who can remain the most boring for the longest period of time. You find yourself in a drafty chamber tucked behind the Ministry of Weights and Measures, labelled modestly as Office for Pebble-Based Discrepancy Reconciliation. A man in a beige robe greets you with a yawn and a scroll half unfurled. "Appeals are up 3-fold this year," he mutters. "Probably because we standardized the turnip duty." The appeals process is like courtroom drama if it were written by someone deeply opposed to drama. The petitioner, usually a villager, merchant, or sometimes an angry monk, comes in to plead their case, that too many pebbles were placed against them, or the wrong color was used, or someone sneezed during the last inventory and everything shifted. You observe a case in progress. A beekeeper claims he was taxed for 12 hives, but he only owns 10, and one of those is haunted. The auditor, a woman named Eudokia, listens patiently, eyes barely blinking. "Are you stating the spectral hive does not produce taxable honey?" she asks, completely deadpan. That's a theological question. She consults her pebble matrix. A wooden board marked with tiny divots, each lined with felt to avoid clacking noises. From a pouch, she removes a set of light violet pebbles. These represent conditional liabilities. The haunted hive, it seems, is eligible for seasonal exemption if it's confirmed to be a site of pilgrimage. Historians still argue whether these exemptions were actually enforced. You're told by a junior scribe who offers you a fig and promptly sneezes on your sleeve. But some sources suggest bees were once considered minor saints. Depends on the year. You trail Eudokia to the audit hall. Here, long benches are filled with scribes reviewing records from as far back as the reign of Basil II. Basil was notorious for his hen tax, one whispers. Nearly caused a coup in Thessaly. Each scribe has a tray of pebbles, a candle, and a cup of barley tea. Occasionally, someone gasps, usually because a ledger error from a century ago has resurfaced. You witness one such moment. An old grain, tithe recorded with turquoise pebbles instead of sea foam, suggesting the payment was meant for drought relief rather than military supply. Misfiled relief funds, you ask? Or secret soup reserves? The scribe replies with a shrug. We're still investigating. In Byzantium, everything is layered. One emperor's reform becomes the next emperor's nightmare. You're shown a parchment detailing a change in 972 where sheep milk taxes were split by breed. The parchment's note reads, "New rule effective immediately. Chaos expected. Indeed, chaos followed." In another chamber, known unofficially as the Scroll Tomb, you find stacks of unresolvable cases. Tax conflicts too complicated or too petty to ever be resolved. One is a dispute between two monks over whether their monastery's candle wax was imported or rendered on site. This has been under review for 61 years, the clerk says proudly. Here, the concept of tax season is a fantasy. Every day is tax season. Appeals, revisions, recalculations, and the occasional imperial pardon keep the system spinning like a slightly unbalanced olive press. The clerk walks you over to a fresco. It's a gentle pastoral scene. Cows, carts, and a man holding what appears to be a jar of pebbles. That's St. Pelagius the Just, he says. Legend says he balanced the imperial ledgers with one hand while soothing angry merchants with the other. You believe that? You ask. The clerk snorts. Of course not. He probably screamed into a pillow like the rest of us. Still, the fresco is oddly calming. Perhaps it's the muted colours, or maybe it's the steady rhythm of a society that, for all its absurdity, believed deeply in order, even if enforced by beige pebbles and passive-aggressive scroll notes. That night, you're invited to the home of one of the appeal's scribes. Dinner is lentil stew, dried dates, and a candied turnip. Over the meal, he shares his favourite case, a goose farmer who argued his birds were emotionally distressed and couldn't be taxed fairly. He lost, the scribe laughs, but we gave him a special pebble. Lavender means nice try. And in that moment, you realise the Byzantine tax system wasn't just a cold machine. It was a performance, a ritual, a kind of slow dance that everyone had memorised over centuries. Taxation as theatre, as community, as bureaucracy, with flair. Outside, the lamps glow softly and the city exhales. Somewhere, a haunted beehive buzzes, and in a dusty office, a pebble is placed in the resolved dish with a soft clink that sounds a little like closure. You're up before dawn again, though to be honest it feels like you never really slept. The bed was comfortable enough, woven rush mat, one slightly lumpy pillow filled with goose down. But your dreams were full of rustling scrolls and judgmental pebbles clicking together like disapproving relatives at a family feast. Today you're visiting a tax inspector on assignment. His name is Leon, and he meets you outside the bureaucratic quarter holding a satchel, a tablet, and a pessimistic expression. "We're heading to the Western Docks," he says. "Imports, exports, and the fish market. The Fishmonger Guild has been under-declaring since the floods of 1024. Claims their sardines aren't what they used to be." He squints at the sun. Neither am I. You follow him down winding alleys, stepping over a stray cat here and there, past a bathhouse already steaming with early bathers. The smell of brine and fresh bread mix in the breeze, a uniquely Byzantine cocktail of mild hope and low-level mildew. At the docks, activity is just picking up. Traders unload amphorae, scribes tally crates of olives, and a group of workers stand around a broken scale, debating whether it's the weights or the table that's crooked. Leon pulls out his inspection tools, a waxed ledger, a packet of coloured pebbles, and a set of tiny standardized bronze weights. The dockmaster greets him with a smile that's a little too wide. "Morning, Leon. No need to check the shrimp today. They're practically voluntary." Leon hums skeptically. "We'll see. Let's begin with anchovy volume." This begins a process of gloriously Byzantine proportional guessing. Each crate is opened, sniffed, occasionally tasted, and measured using a kind of filling index that supposedly correlates to how densely the fish are packed. Too loose, and the crate is suspect. Too tight, and it might qualify for the luxury bracket. Historians still argue whether the fish density rubric was intentionally vague, Leon says as he scribbles notes, or if it just evolved into an art form out of sheer desperation. You're handed a small clay token. "It's your temporary inspection badge," Leon explains. "If someone offers you a bribe, wave this and say something ominous like, 'It is recorded.' They'll back off." Sure enough, a spice merchant tries to slip you a silver coin under the pretense of lavender preservation rights. You repeat the line with as much gravitas as you can muster. It works. The merchant pales slightly and begins aggressively sweeping his stall. From the docks, you and Leon wander into the adjoining warehouse district. Here the taxation grows more esoteric. Silk bolts are taxed by thread count, nuts by shell integrity, and pottery by aesthetic value, which is as subjective as it sounds. One inspector shows you 2 amphorae, identical at first glance, but one has a tiny spiral motif along the neck. That spiral, he says, pushes it into the Class 2 decorative tier, 5 extra obols per shipment, unless the artist sneezed while engraving, which voids the charge. You ask if they actually check for that. "Oh no. We just pretend to squint and nod. Lunch is a quick affair. Some grilled sardines and a lentil cake eaten with the sea air tangling your hair." Leon talks about his early days in tax school, where pebble technique was taught using dry beans and poetry was discouraged. "Bureaucrats don't rhyme," he says, "unless it's to remember which shade of grey means what." He finishes his meal and groans. Now comes the hard part, exemptions. You follow him to a side pier where an elderly woman is selling what appears to be fermented cabbage stuffed into oyster shells. "Religious food," she explains, "consumed only on St. Methodius's 3rd feast day. Therefore, exempt." Leon inspects the shells. They smell like an existential crisis but seem legit. He nods. "Very well. but I'll need to file a specialty provision scroll. She hands him a blue pebble. This one's from last year, she says cheerily, in case the office lost my exemption again. Leon smiles politely and pockets it, then turns to you and mutters, "We always lose the exemptions. On purpose, tradition." There's a strange satisfaction in this day-long ballet of ambiguous measurements and near bribes. You realize that the system, while maddeningly complex, has a rhythm. Like Byzantine music, it doesn't follow Western scales, but it has a beauty of its own if you stop resisting and let it wash over you. You see disputes settled with sighs and shrugs, small kindnesses passed off as corrections, and a quiet respect for anyone who's mastered the art of pebble placement. You even catch a rare moment of rebellion. A teenager sneaking past the market inspectors with a basket of figs and a sign that reads, "Tax these." The inspectors don't chase him. One just says, "He'll be back. They always come back." As the sun sinks into the Marmara, Leon closes his ledger. We've done enough damage for one day. Back to the ministry to file this mess. And as you walk the quieting streets, pebbles clinking gently in Leon's satchel, you start to see it. The Byzantine Empire as less a place of marble palaces and grand battles, and more as a living paper trail, one that curls and folds in on itself, creating a world where even fish scales and fig baskets are worthy of imperial notice. You glance at the sky. A seagull circles above, probably untaxed. The filing chambers await you like a yawning, parchment-scented beast. You and Leon arrive at the Ministry of Revenues just as the lamps are being lit. Their warm, oily glow casts dancing shadows across walls lined with cubbyholes, each stuffed with scrolls, tokens, and what looks suspiciously like dried fruit. No one questions it. Probably someone's lunch, or bribe evidence, maybe both. "Welcome to the paper vaults," Leon says with mock grandeur, or as some of us call it, the pit of no return. You descend into the main scriptorium, a vast, windowless room humming with the soft shuffle of sandals and the eternal scratching of quills. Rows upon rows of scribes sit at desks, hunched like monks, copying tax entries from wax tablets to parchment scrolls, their faces bathed in a light haze of ink and despair. Your first task? Pebble processing. Each coloured pebble collected today, about 37 in total, has to be logged, evaluated, and assigned to its respective tax bracket. There's a special clerk just for this. Her name is Thalia, and she has a memory like an elephant and the social warmth of a frostbitten eel. You watch as she examines each pebble under a small bronze lamp, squints at the colour, and mutters things like, "Sea glass blue. That's either a partial fish tariff or a failed olive bribe." She flips it once, twice, then places it into a categorized bowl. You half expect her to whisper ancient curses over them. Historians still argue whether the colors were ever formally codified, she tells you without looking up. Some think it was just what was available near the beach. From there, Leon guides you to the ledger department, where the day's notes are transferred into official tax scrolls. The scrolls are written in a stylized hand called minuscule bureaucratica, notorious for looking like someone tried to write Greek letters during an earthquake. You're handed a brush and inkstone. "Copy this entry," Leon says, pointing to a line that reads something like, "On this, the 5th day of the month, Panemos, Leon of the Pebble Authority, inspected 47 baskets of anchovies, 3 of which were deemed suspiciously optimistic in density, and levied an additional 6 obols in accordance with the Marine Freshness Amendment." You try. You really do. But 5 minutes in, Your hand cramps, your ink blots the page, and Thalea mutters something about barbarian calligraphy. You wisely set the brush down. Somewhere behind you, a scroll drops. A scribe gasps. That scroll, you learn, contains tax exemptions for every vine leaf harvester in Galatia. 5 years of work, apparently. A solemn bell is rung. The scroll is gently placed in a reconstruction pile that's taller than you. To lighten the mood, Leon shows you the Hall of Tax Oddities. It's a side chamber reserved for the strangest items ever levied. Goat-shaped loaves of bread taxed as livestock, wigs made from temple candle trimmings, and one memorable filing. 3 mimes, mute and taxable as entertainment. He shrugs. The Empire tried to tax silence once. Didn't stick. Afterward, you're invited to witness the Great Compilation, an enormous annual scroll made of stitched parchment lengths, detailing the Empire's total tax intake by category. A masterpiece of ink and obsession, it's held together with linen thread and a frankly unsettling amount of goose grease. Every new entry is sung aloud by a cantor to check for meter. Not accuracy, just meter. It helps the rhythm, the cantor says, makes it harder to fake a line. Nearby, too, scribes argue over whether a shipment of decorative figs from Cilicia should be filed under fruit, festival, or food-shaped diplomacy. You ask Leon which it is. He shrugs. All 3. Depends on how much we like the sender. Break time. You sip watered wine from a chipped cup while Leon shares stories from his early days. How he once misfiled a horse tax as a perfume shipment and accidentally triggered a diplomatic spat with a minor desert king. We had to send him actual perfume. He was delighted. You're beginning to see that for all its convolution, Byzantine tax filing was less about precision and more about tradition. Ritualized ambiguity performed with reverent inaccuracy. It wasn't meant to be efficient. It was meant to be eternal. As the evening deepens, a scroll courier rushes in with a message. The Dyrrachium branch has filed a complaint. Apparently, a recent tax on sunny window spots in bakeries has led to widespread outrage and a strike by the Guild of Raisin Bread Makers. A scribe begins composing a reply that includes the phrase, insufficient spiritual ventilation. You don't ask. Instead, you help tie the day's scrolls with colored thread, tuck them into their storage alcoves, and marvel at how many people it takes to move a single pebble through this system. Probably more than it took to build some temples. Before you leave, Thalea offers you a token. A tiny clay disc stamped with a smiling grape cluster. Non-taxable, she says. For good behavior. It's the highest honor you've received all day. You sleep poorly that night. Unsurprising, considering the stone bench you tried to call a bed and the pigeon that insisted on holding a midnight sermon outside your window. Still, dawn creeps in, and with it comes the quiet hum of Constantinople, waking up with bread carts rattling over the cobblestones and the ever-present bark of impatient donkeys. You drag yourself to Leon's side again. Today, you're told, is audit day. The word alone carries a certain gravity. Leon says it like a monk might say judgment or laundry. The imperial auditor is due to arrive any minute now, and the Ministry of Revenues is in full panic butterfly mode. Scrolls are unrolled, stacked, double-checked. Pebbles are counted, sorted, resorted. Someone's even sweeping the floor, which hasn't been swept since the last solar eclipse. Who's the auditor, you ask, and Leon replies with only, he wears velvet shoes. That should tell you everything. The The doors creak open, and in glides Auditor Maximos. Tall, silk-robed, expression carved from marble, and yes, velvet shoes. Embroidered with tiny eagles. You feel your back straighten by reflex. He begins with a walkthrough, saying nothing, only peering at things and raising a single skeptical eyebrow now and then. One unfortunate scribe faints. Maximos steps over him without missing a beat. Eventually, he speaks. Let's begin with the olive oil exemptions. The room freezes. The olive oil exemptions file is controversial. See, several provinces have tried to claim that certain types of oil, pressed by virgins, stored in blue glazed amphorae, blessed by monks, etc., shouldn't be taxed. The empire, of course, disagrees, but it also needs those provinces to not rebel. So there's been a lot of quiet backpedaling and even quieter bribery. Historians still argue whether the exemptions were ever enforced, Leon whispers, or if it was just a seasonal illusion. Maximos taps a scroll. This entry says, Divine pressed oil, Antioch, taxed as perfumed grease. That legal? You both nod. Vigorously. Maximos stares at you like you've just admitted to taxing sunlight. Eventually, he moves on to the unusual item register. This week alone, the Empire has received tax payments in the form of a singing parrot who recites imperial laws, 1.5 working catapults, a marble bust of the goddess Hera with a suspiciously removable wig, and 6 barrels of haunted lentils, allegedly cursed by a disgruntled Thessalian widow. Maximos says nothing, just underlines haunted lentils and adds a tiny question mark. You trail after him to the Pebble archive, where the most bizarre part of today's audit begins. Pebble matching. Apparently, each tax collector submits not only their day's Pebbles, but also a separate reference set. It's the bureaucratic version of a control group. If the two sets don't match, something shady's gone on. Either a bribe, a misfiling, or an overeager assistant who got creative with paint. Maximos begins matching Pebbles with terrifying precision. This red one is coral, filed as cinnabar. Explain. Leon swallows hard. Lighting in the field was poor. Maximos raises that eyebrow again. To lighten the mood, Leon introduces the Pebble Poetry Board, a cork wall where bored clerks have pinned haikus inspired by their work. You read a few. Smooth green oval weights, like a bribe that tells no tales. Oh, tax gods be kind. And tiny stone. I hate. Your smug refusal to count. Just be a number. Maximos reads one, then grunts. Acceptable meter. You all breathe easier. After lunch, pickled, eggs and wine so acidic it could clean bronze, the audit moves to scroll retention. Maximos inspects the fireproof chests where the Empire stores tax documents dating back to Emperor Zeno. Most of them are unreadable now. Some have mold. One smells distinctly of goats. Still, he insists on a ceremonial scroll recitation. You sit through 45 minutes of a scribe chanting a tax decree from 472 AD concerning coastal sheep migration rights and whether wool should be taxed before or after shearing. You catch Leon dozing with his eyes open. There's a break during which Maximos disappears into a side room labelled Discrepancy Review. Everyone knows better than to follow. When he returns, he announces, minor irregularities. Acceptable. Proceed. The office exhales. One clerk bursts into tears of relief. As a reward, you're allowed to help file the auditor's notes. This involves dipping a feather in red ink, and adding a footnote to the day's scroll. Auditor Maximos found the office, mostly competent. Some pebbles were suspiciously spherical. Recommend less gloss. That evening, Maximos departs in a velvet-shod swirl, leaving behind only the faint scent of nutmeg and fear. Leon collapses onto a bench and offers you a sip of his evening wine. You survived audit day, he says. Most don't. Well, they do. But they change. You ask if it ever gets easier. No, he replies, swirling his cup. But it gets funnier. That's the secret. Outside, the city breathes again, relieved and slightly poorer. And somewhere, a fresh batch of pebbles is already being painted. You spend the next morning with a mild pebble hangover and an even milder sense of dread. Leon is already awake, sitting in a pool of morning light, sipping something that smells like burnt figs and regret. Today, he says, we meet the naval tax clerk. You stare at him blankly. That's a real job. Leon nods. Oh yes, the Byzantine Navy is many things. Glorious, underfunded, slightly flammable, but above all it is extremely taxable. You stroll down toward the port of Constantinople, passing bakeries and sandal menders, the faint buzz of the hippodrome still echoing from the previous night's chariot race. The harbour itself is a flurry of activity. Sailors shouting in Cappadocian, Greek crates of dried fish being unloaded, a man arguing with a goat about customs fees, seagulls scream overhead like unpaid interns. You're led to a low stone building near the docks, where a bronze sign reads, Office of Naval Provisions, Levies, and Tar Payment Arbitration. Inside, you meet Eusebius, the naval tax clerk. He's thin, sun-scorched, and carries himself like someone who once tried to collect taxes from pirates and barely survived. He greets you with a weary wave. Welcome. Do you like seaweed ink? He asks, holding up a pen that smells briny and vaguely suspicious. Today's task, reconciling the naval grain records with the tax quotas submitted by provincial ports. Sounds dry, and it is, until Eusebius starts explaining the problems. See? This? He points to a scroll. This dockmaster claims he loaded 12 barrels of millet onto a grain galley in July. That's reasonable, except the galley in question was sinking off the coast of Crete at the time. Historians still argue whether this was a clerical error or a bold attempt at ghost shipping. Leon chuckles. I vote ghost. Eusebius sighs. More likely, laziness, or bribes, or seagull interference. You help sort the discrepancies. It's not easy. Naval taxes are paid partly in coin, partly in goods, dried fruit, rope, pitch, sometimes songbirds, and partly in services. One, particularly confusing line item reads, 1 week of anchor polishing performed by twins of good reputation. What does that even mean? You ask. Eusebius shrugs. No idea, but the twins are now minor celebrities in Trebizond. You start to understand the bureaucratic challenge here. Ships come and go. Cargo is fluid. Taxable goods rot, sink, or get eaten by deckhands. Pebbles don't work well in marine environments. Too easy to drop overboard. So instead, the Navy uses wax seals and token cords, each color-coded to represent different duties paid or owed. Leon hands you a handful of cords, red for ore tax, blue for sailcloth levy, yellow for salted meat duties, and green for miscellaneous naval burdens, a phrase that somehow feels both vague and ominous. Here's a mystery, Eusebius says. pulling a box off a shelf. Inside are dozens of tokens wrapped in black cord. These, he explains, are black cord tokens. No one remembers what they mean. They appear in the ledgers starting around 844 AD, vanish by 877, and are never mentioned again. They don't correspond to any known naval tax. Historians still argue whether they were punishment markers, bribes, or just a failed initiative. Leon whispers, or maybe cursed. You spend an hour trying to trace their origin, but the trail dissolves into scribbled margins and a footnote about pigeon tax confusion, which, frankly, sounds about right. After lunch, grilled anchovies, bitter greens, and a flatbread that tastes like it was baked under someone's bed, you're invited to attend a levy hearing. A merchant from Chios is contesting a tar payment. He argues that since his ship was only in port for 6 hours, he shouldn't be charged for a full day's use of the Imperial Tar Reserve. Eusebius counters that the rules are very clear. Any vessel exceeding 5½ hours docked is liable for daily tar rates, regardless of actual application or adhesion. It's absurd. It's petty. It's Byzantine to the bone. The merchant leaves grumbling. Eusebius sighs. Every week it's this. Last month someone tried to pay their levy in musical shellfish. And don't get me started on the octopus trader. 8 tentacles. 0 documentation. The day ends with a tour of the naval ledger room. You're surrounded by shelves sagging under scrolls. One section is marked Ship Names 700, 900 AD. Another, Leaky Hull Claims, sorted by degree of sogginess. Your favorite? A thick volume titled Unusual Onboard Tax Deductions. It includes 1 trained ferret used as pest control, 40 gallons of sea-blessed wine for Poseidon, appeasement, a small shrine to St. Nicholas carved from stale biscuits, and one sailor's claim for a tax break on beard grooming as it improves morale. As the sun dips over the Sea of Marmara, Eusebius leans on a crate and lights a little cone of cedar incense. Navy taxes are like sea monsters, he says. You know they exist, but you're never quite sure what you're looking at. You walk back to the ministry with Leon, carrying a pouch of fraying tax cords, the smell of tar in your sleeves, and the distinct sense that someone, somewhere, is definitely getting away with something involving a haunted parrot. Still, you made it through another day. Mostly dry, only mildly confused, and now qualified to distinguish between 5 types of rope tax. Sleep comes easier tonight, probably thanks to that seaweed ink. Weirdly calming. The next morning, you wake to the rhythmic clang of temple bells and the distant chant of street sweepers, arguing about whose broom is more imperially aligned. You stretch beneath your linen sheets, already imagining a quiet day. Perhaps some parchment folding, a little pebble polishing, and a nap under the citrus tree near the scribe's dormitory. But no. Leon appears, once again holding a scroll and a grin. Today, he says, we descend into the basement of misfiled writs. You blink. That's an actual place? Oh yes, Leon assures you. It's where tax forms, border complaints, and questionable imperial edicts go to sleep. Forever. You dress slowly, as though putting on sandals might somehow delay the inevitable. But soon enough, you're following Leon down a stone staircase beneath the main tax hall, past the usual colonnades, past the scribe's courtyard with its twitchy mosaic pigeons, and into a world of mildew and misfiled ambition. The basement of misfiled writs is less a basement and more a labyrinth. Scrolls spill from unlabeled cubbies. Racks creak under the weight of bureaucratic mistakes. A soft, echoing drip implies that somewhere nearby, the aqueduct has strong opinions about this room's humidity. You're greeted by Sophia, the basement curator. She wears a hooded cowl, has the posture of someone who's been reading in poor lighting for 3 decades, and speaks with the slow diction of a person who once got into a shouting match with a spider. She hands you a candle. No torches. The papyrus gets skittish. Today's task is to inventory the disputed levees section. This area is cordoned off with silk rope and a sign that reads, in red ink, "Enter if you must, but know that nothing down here ever truly balances." You start with a scroll marked Oyster Saltation Fee, 807 AD. Apparently, a seaside village attempted to charge visiting traders a dancing tax based on how excited their oysters appeared during festivals. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine fiscal initiative or just a prank played on a gullible assessor. Leon chuckles. Either way, the oysters won. Further in, you uncover the infamous blank scroll incident, a bundle of pristine scrolls, all submitted as tax declarations from a provincial official named Phocas the Younger. Each scroll utterly blank, not a mark, not a pebble imprint, not even a stray hair. Sophia explains, Phocas claimed he'd discovered an invisible ink of divine simplicity, claimed the emperor would see the numbers only if he was worthy. And was he, you ask? Oh heavens no. He was eaten by goats the next spring. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets. One scroll documents a petition from a group of traveling monks who demanded a pilgrimage reimbursement because they'd taken a vow of silence and couldn't negotiate decent rates for ferry crossings. They were billed under quiet travel. Partial subsidy denied. You sit on a crate marked unsorted scribbles, handle with ambiguity, and take a breath. The air smells like vinegar, an ancient shame. At one point, you find a ledger dedicated solely to tax debts owed by long-dead poets. Names like Agapetos of Antioch and Heliodora the Melancholy fill the pages. Their crimes, neglecting to declare. Fees earned through poetic recitation in public squares. Byzantine tax law, Sophia notes, did not make exceptions for art. One ledger, your favorite so far, is labeled Provisional Penalties for Imaginary Incomes. Inside are dozens of cases where people were fined for earnings they might have made, had their businesses not failed. A cobbler who never opened his shop, a lamp oil merchant who misread the lunar calendar, a falconer who trained squirrels instead. All taxed. You'd think they'd have caught on, you mutter. Leon smiles. They probably did, but the empire needed grain, and the squirrels weren't unionized. As you file another scroll, you come across a threadbare satchel labeled Tokens Without Cause. Inside, small wax discs and clay chips, all bearing official seals, but no discernible purpose. Sophia sighs. We call them orphans. They belong to programs that were cancelled or departments that only existed for a week. My favourite, the Ministry for the Cataloguing of Imperial Brooms. They lasted 3 days. You hold up one orphan token, a faint carving of a mop and stars. It's oddly beautiful. Do we ever destroy these, you ask? Sophia shakes her head. Of course not. That would be tax fraud. You spend the afternoon sorting duplicates, cross-referencing scrawled notes with the imperial filing schema, which changes every century, and trying not to sneeze from scroll dust. One scroll contains nothing but a doodle of what looks like a dancing radish and the words, "No levy today, thank you." It's unsigned. Another is a love poem, mistakenly filed as a trade contract. It includes the line, "Your eyes are like unfined parchment, slightly yellowed and wildly expensive." Leon reads it twice. Romantic and tax-deductible. Before you leave, Sophia gifts you a bureaucrat's blessing, a small token, made of pressed beeswax and rosemary ash. It's meant to ward off filing errors and encourage accurate handwriting. "I made it myself," she says proudly, though technically, it's not legal tender. You return upstairs smelling like vinegar parchment and philosophical despair. But you're oddly proud. You've braved the lowest recesses of Byzantine bureaucracy and emerged with only 3 paper cuts and 1 questionable poem in your pocket. As you climb the stairs out of the basement, you feel the warm draft of afternoon light. It's as if the entire building is breathing again. You step into the sun, squinting at the bustle of the imperial square. Pigeons coo. A scribe drops a scroll into a puddle and curses in elegant cursive. You smile. You survived the basement of misfiled writs. And now anything feels possible, even reconciling a marble tax discrepancy. You return to your office to find a fresh tray of colored pebbles awaiting you, polished smooth, labeled with care, and likely charged to your departmental tab with a generous markup for aesthetic harmony. Next to them lies a scroll. No name, no sender, just a faint seal, a stylized weasel holding a tax quill. It can only mean one thing: audit time. The Byzantine Empire, for all its theological debates and architectural ambitions, had one unshakable certainty. Everyone, eventually, got audited. Even the imperial cat, a large tabby named Komnenos, once received a letter demanding proof of domicile. Your audit comes from the Office of Procedural Alignment and Revenue Clarity, or, as Leon calls it, the OPARC. Their motto is etched in gilded letters on the scroll's ribbon. Certainty through confusion. You sit down, crack your knuckles, and read. Dear citizen functionary, a review of your previous 5 quarters has produced several questions, including, but not limited to, the double use of the blue oblong pebble during lunar alignment, the disappearance of 1 saffron-colored marble on market day, the possible inflation of goose-related tithes in Provincial Sector 7. Kindly provide clarification within 3 business days, or a donkey of your choosing will be selected to explain the discrepancies in your stead. Historians still argue whether the donkey clause was ever enforced, or if it simply encouraged hasty handwriting. Leon peeks in. "Ah, you got the scroll. What happens if I fail?" "Oh, nothing dramatic," he shrugs. "They just repaint your door red and issue a mildly insulting hymn in your honor." You set to work, cross-referencing your pebble allocations with the logbooks. Each entry feels like a test. Did you mean to submit 2 yellow pebbles for wheat storage, or was one meant to be for barley speculation? Was the chipped green stone a discount indicator, or just a rock from your lunch? You pause. Breathe. Remember what Sophia said. The scroll remembers, but so do you. After hours of flicking through documents, you find it. The missing saffron marble was accidentally used to prop open a window during the olive shortage, heatwave. There's even a tiny drawing in the margin, a marble sweating, You jot it down in your explanation scroll, embellishing with just enough poetic exaggeration to sound honest. Next, you tackle the goose tithe. An entire village claimed to have spontaneously generated 23 new geese overnight, which you had dutifully taxed under anomalous avian output. Now, under review, you realize the geese were borrowed. Yes, Leon confirms when you ask. It was a goose loaning scheme. Very controversial. You sigh, adjust the numbers, and draft a clarifying addendum. Correction. Geese in question were not spontaneous but leased. Tithe recalculated at standard migratory poultry rates. By evening, you've pieced together your defense. Each paragraph couched in elegant flattery and just enough ambiguity to be Byzantine. The scroll ends with the ritual sign-off. Let this be filed under Moonlight Review Category Delta. Mistakes made with dignity. You seal it with wax, press your bureau's seal, a moderately surprised squirrel, into the blob, and hand it off to a runner. It's done. For now. To unwind, you wander through the imperial gardens, watching tax scribes unwind by feeding breadcrumbs to imperial ducks. One particularly elegant duck wears a tiny scroll tube. Leon whispers, "That one delivers summons. Avoid eye contact." You pass a quiet corner where junior bureaucrats practice pebble placement. It's part art, part meditation. One fumbles, sending a red stone skittering into the pond. 10 years off your career, Leon jokes. You smile. There's something soothing about all this absurd order. It's fussy, yes, occasionally illogical, but it also means everyone, from the emperor to the village goat thief, dances the same strange dance. Back in your quarters, you unroll your favorite scroll, not a tax record, but an illustrated guide to Pebble symbolism. Blue stands for grain, trade, and loyalty. Red for livestock, punishment, and passion. Green, bureaucratic errors and moss. You find yourself doodling, a small scene of you standing triumphantly on a hill of marbles, scroll in hand, eyebrows furrowed in majestic confusion. You caption it. Victory through vague precision. Outside, the sun dips below the mosaic-tiled roofs. You close your eyes and imagine a world where every problem can be solved with the right color-coded stone. Where taxes are not just paid, but gently caressed into place. Where even a goose-led scandal can be filed away with grace. That's Byzantium for you. Endlessly ornate, occasionally baffling, strangely comforting. You drift asleep to the soft rustle of scrolls in the wind and the delicate clink of pebbles on a marble floor. You wake before sunrise to the distant clatter of wheels and the faint cry of a market rooster. The kind that sounds like it's been smoking scrolls instead of crowing. Your eyes adjust to the pale flicker of dawn filtering through the lattice window. Today's the final inspection. The day when all your pebble-laying, ink-scribbling, duck-avoiding labours are reviewed. When your work, every trivial tally and overly poetic expense note, is scrutinised by the auditors. You rise, stretch, and slip into your formal toga, bureaucratic blue with subtle tax quill embroidery. You even polish your sandals. It's said the chief inspector can deduct points for auditory clatter due to unkempt soles. You make your way through the echoing halls of the Records Basilica. The scent of old parchment and beeswax polish is comforting now, familiar, like returning to a favourite cafe where the menus are all tax codes. At the tribunal's table sits a trio: Theophilos the Stern, Marina the All-Knowing, and, surprise, Leon. He winks, already holding a cup of date-infused coffee. Don't worry, he whispers. I pre-reviewed your pebble clusters. Only one eyebrow raise. Historians still argue whether these final inspections were more symbolic or wielded real power, depending on the emperor's mood and breakfast quality. You hand over your sealed report. Marina unfurls it with the reverence of someone handling a saint's toenail. Her eyes glide across the script, pausing occasionally to murmur, and unconventional pebble alignment, but defensible. Theophilos frowns. Why was a goat cited as a mobile grain storage unit? It was tethered inside a barn filled with wheat. Technically, you begin. He grunts. Fine. The review continues. There are giggles over the goose loaning note. Marina nods in appreciation at your tithe adjustments due to goose leasing clauses. She even underlines it. Leon chimes in with faux authority. This clause is now known as the Aves Exemplar Protocol. Very trendy. By midday they lean back. Verdict time. Theophilos intones. Your methods are unconventional. Your margins, wide. Your metaphors, florid. You gulp. But, Marina adds, your documentation is meticulous. Your humor, appropriate. And your use of the green-chipped pebble for moss taxation, inspired. Leon holds up his coffee in salute. They stamp the scroll. Approved. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding since Section 3. It's done. You are officially in compliance. For the next fiscal moon cycle, at least. To celebrate, Leon invites you to the bureaucrat's bathhouse. Not the fancy public one, but the lesser-known one tucked behind the Office of Weights and Mysterious Measures. There, warm mineral water bubbles gently around marble seats shaped like ledger books. You soak in the water, letting the steam curl into the air like errant scroll edges. A few other clerks nod at you in recognition. One plays a lyre, softly. Another mutters a tax poem under his breath. You close your eyes, drifting. Here, in this warm bath of ink-stained silence, you reflect. You think of the peasants who may never understand why they owe 2 yellow pebbles for crossing a river while carrying cheese. Of the farmers who claim the tax pigeon never arrived. Of the distant islands where records are kept on driftwood and memory. Yet the system works. Not smoothly, not fairly, always. But it holds. Remember, Leon says beside you, eyes closed. Byzantium wasn't built in a day, but it was once delayed 3 weeks due to an ink shortage. You chuckle, then sigh. The bathwater hums. The pebbles are at rest. The scrolls filed. And the tax code, it waits patiently, always. Outside, the bells chime. Sunset. You rise, dry off with a towel stamped Imperial Property, do not quarrel over, and head home. Your door is unpainted. No donkey is tethered outside. A success by any metric. At home, you light a small oil lamp and open your journal. In a final flourish, you draw a pebble, just one. A new design, oval, sky blue. You label it Pebble of Completion. You place it on your desk next to your collection. A gentle reminder that even Byzantine madness can eventually lead to a moment of peace. And now, that moment is yours. The lamp flickers low now, casting long shadows over the pebble on your desk. The day's noise has melted into the velvet. Hush of night. The busy scribes, the fluttering ledgers, even the geese, they've all settled. Somewhere beyond the city walls, The breeze rustles through cypress trees, soft as parchment turning. You lie down, wrapped in a thin wool blanket, your thoughts drifting as slowly as that last pebble sliding into place on your final ledger. The air is cool, carrying the faintest scent of olive oil and lavender from the neighbour's stoop. A bell in the distance chimes once, slow and low, like a city exhaling after a long bureaucratic breath. You did it, whatever else tomorrow brings. More pebbles to sort, more ledgers to recopy, more debates over goat-based accounting. It can. Wait, for now, your mind is weightless, floating in a warm bath of Byzantine calm. Let the rhythms of ancient ink and old stone carry you deeper into stillness. You're not in a dusty office anymore. You're on a quiet hillside above Constantinople, watching the moon glint off the golden horn, soft and silver. It reflects every pebble and scroll you ever filed, then dissolves into dream. Tonight, there, are no quotas, no pigeons to chase, just sleep. Sleep, and the quiet reassurance that somewhere, in a candlelit scriptorium, another clerk is curling up too, with ink-stained fingers and a contented sigh. Good night, gentle listener.